The emergency broadcast cut through every frequency in the galaxy like a scream in the dark. Lena's voice trembled as she spoke into the recorder, her three-fingered hands shaking. The Torvan diplomat had lived for 2 centuries, but nothing in her long life had prepared her for this moment. Behind her, through the viewport of the council chambers, entire star systems were going dark. Not destroyed, consumed. The Ravagers had arrived 3 weeks ago, and already 200 billion souls had simply ceased to exist. "This is Ambassador Lena of the Galactic Council," she said, forcing her voice steady. "We are transmitting on all known channels. If anyone can hear this, we need help. The defense fleets are gone. The outer sectors are lost. Whatever weapons you have, whatever forces you can spare, please. We are begging you." The message traveled faster than light, bouncing through relay stations and communications arrays. Most species were too far away or too weak to help. Some ignored it entirely, already planning their own evacuations. But on a moon orbiting a gas giant in a distant spiral arm, something happened that would change everything. Patricia Okonkwo had been reviewing supply reports when the transmission arrived. The admiral of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet was not a woman given to drama, but something about that desperate voice made her stop. She played the message 3 times, watching the attached footage of bioships the size of cities tearing through defensive positions like they were made of paper. "Get me the command staff," she said quietly to her assistant. "All of them. Now." Within an hour, 20 officers crowded into the briefing room on Titan Station. They watched the broadcast in silence. When it ended, nobody spoke for a long moment. "We don't even know these species," said Commander David Walsh, his arms crossed. "They've never acknowledged our existence. For 50 years we've been sending diplomatic signals and they've ignored every single one." "Does that matter?" Patricia asked. David met her eyes. He was younger than her by a decade, still carrying the rigid mindset of military protocol. But she saw something shift in his expression. "No, ma'am. I suppose it doesn't." Dr. Priya Sharma leaned forward, her fingers flying across a datapad. The xenobiologist had been analyzing the Ravager ships from the footage. "These things aren't using conventional technology. Look at this." She projected an image onto the main screen. "That's biological matter. They're growing their ships. And based on the consumption rate, they'll reach the Council core systems in less than 2 months. Which means they'll reach human space in 4, added Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez. The young pilot had been quiet until now, but his voice carried weight. Everyone knew his family had died when colony raiders hit the outer settlements 10 years ago. If we let them get that far. Patricia stood and walked to the viewport. Earth hung below them, blue and green and beautiful. Humanity had clawed its way out of that gravity well through blood and determination. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have ended them. They had learned to fight by fighting everything their world threw at them. "The United Earth government will need to vote," she said finally. "But I'm going to recommend we deploy the fleet. All 47 ships, 15,000 personnel, everything we've got that can fly and shoot." "They'll think we're insane," said Chief Engineer Robert Kim, "jumping into someone else's war." "Maybe we are," Patricia replied. She turned back to face them. "But I didn't join the fleet to stand by while billions die. Did any of you?" The silence that followed was different this time. One by one, her officers shook their heads. The vote took 3 days. The debates raged across Earth, Mars, Europa, and every human colony in between. Some argued for isolation, others worried about the cost. But in the end, the numbers spoke clearly. 78% voted yes. Patricia received the authorization code on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. She immediately ordered the fleet to prepare for departure. Ships that had been on patrol were recalled. Supplies were loaded at triple speed. Families said goodbye to their loved ones, not knowing if they would return. Dr. Sharma spent those days studying everything the Council had ever published about their civilization. It wasn't much. The Galactic Council considered itself the pinnacle of civilization, and they had little interest in what they called fringe species. She found references to something called the Deathworld classification system. Earth was rated Class 12, the highest category, a planet so hostile that sentient life should not have been possible. "They think we're primitives," she told Patricia during one of their planning sessions. "Then they're in for a surprise," Patricia replied. On departure day, the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet assembled in formation around Titan. 47 warships. their hulls bristling with weapons that humanity had perfected through centuries of conflict. These were not elegant vessels. They were blunt instruments built to take damage and keep fighting. Patricia stood on the bridge of the carrier Indomitable and looked at her crew. Young faces, old faces, every color and background that Earth could offer. They had volunteered for this. Every single one of them. "All ships report ready," David announced from his station. "Then let's go save some aliens," Patricia said. "Jump!" The fleet vanished in a flash of light, leaving human space behind. They jumped toward a war they had no obligation to fight, for people who had never asked for their help until they had nowhere else to turn. But that was what humans did. They showed up when it mattered most. Space near the threshold relay twisted and shattered as 47 human warships materialized from faster-than-light travel. Patricia felt the familiar lurch in her stomach as the Indomitable returned to normal space. Around them, the battle was already over. Or rather, the slaughter was almost complete. 3 massive bioships hung in the void like diseased organs, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. They were feeding on a refugee convoy, their tendrils wrapped around civilian transports, draining them of matter and energy. Patricia counted 15 ships already reduced to empty husks. On her sensors, she could see life pods ejecting desperately, but the Ravagers were consuming those too. "Multiple distress signals," reported the communications officer. "Council Defense Platform is broadcasting surrender terms." "To what?" David asked, staring at the view screen. "Those things don't negotiate." Patricia opened a channel to the defense platform. "This is Admiral Patricia Okonkwo of the United Earth Forces. We're here to help. Tell your civilians to get as far from those ships as possible." The reply came in a language her translator struggled with for a moment. Then a voice emerged, high-pitched and layered with harmonics. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Holm of the Veridi Defense Fleet. You cannot win against them. Nothing can. Save yourselves." "We didn't come here to run," Patricia said. She switched to fleet-wide communications. "All ships engage at will. Target those bioships. Let's see if they can digest nuclear fire." The human fleet split into attack formations with practiced precision. The Ravager ships were enormous, each one massing more than 5 human vessels combined. But they moved slowly. Patricia watched as the first wave of missiles streaked across the darkness, their engines burning bright. The Ravagers noticed them now. The bioships began to move, their tendrils releasing the refugee convoy to face this new threat. Energy discharges crackled across their surfaces, forming defensive barriers. The first missiles detonated against those barriers in brilliant flashes, but they barely scratched the organic armor. "They're tougher than they look," David muttered. "Then we hit them harder," Patricia replied. "Walsh, coordinate with Rodriguez. Get our fighters inside their defensive perimeter." Sam Rodriguez launched from the Indomitable with his squadron of 36 fighters. They were small craft, barely 20 meters long, but they were fast and carried enough firepower to crack an asteroid. Sam had been born on Mars in the low-gravity domes, and he flew like he was part of the ship itself. "Listen up," he called to his squadron. "Those energy barriers have gaps. We're going to fly right through them and plant charges on their hull. Don't think about the size. Don't think about the odds. Just fly." They accelerated toward the nearest bioship, weaving through fields of defensive energy that crackled and sparked. 2 fighters were hit immediately, their pilots dead before they could scream. But the rest pushed through, their momentum carrying them past the barrier and onto the organic surface of the Ravager vessel. Sam's fighter skimmed across the hull, so close he could see the individual cellular structures pulsing beneath the surface. He released his payload, magnetic charges that clamped onto the alien flesh, then pulled up hard to avoid a tendril that whipped toward him. "Charges set," he reported. "Get clear!" The squadron scattered as the charges detonated. Nuclear fire bloomed across the bioship's hull, burning through meters of organic armor. The Ravager screamed, a sound that traveled through electromagnetic frequencies and made every human sensor system howl with feedback. But it was still alive. "All ships, concentrated fire on the breach," Patricia ordered. The human fleet opened up with everything they had. Railguns launched slugs at a significant fraction of light speed. Energy weapons carved burning lines across the wounded section. Missiles penetrated deep into the bioship's interior before detonating. The Ravager tried to regenerate, new growth spreading across the wound, but the human weapons were relentless. Patricia watched as the bioship's movements became erratic. Internal explosions rippled across its surface. Then finally it began to break apart. Chunks of organic matter drifted into space, freezing and dying in the void. One down. Two to go. The other Ravager ships abandoned their prey and turned their full attention to the human fleet. They moved faster now with purpose and rage. Energy weapons fired from biological cannons, beams of concentrated power that could vaporize a ship in seconds. The destroyer Phoenix took a direct hit, its shields collapsing, its hull melting. 200 crew died in an instant. Evasive maneuvers, Patricia ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos. Don't give them a clean shot. The human ship scattered, their engines burning at maximum as they dodged and weaved. It looked like chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Every captain knew their role. They were drawing the Ravagers' attention, spreading their fire, creating openings. David coordinated the second wave of fighters, sending them after the wounded bioship while the fleet kept the third one busy. Maria Santos was part of that wave, a young lieutenant who had joined the fleet straight out of academy. She had grown up in the high-gravity regions of Venus, where every movement required strength and determination. Her fighter penetrated deep into the second bioship, flying through wounds that Sam's squadron had opened. Inside the ship was a nightmare of pulsing organs and flowing fluids. Combat drones emerged from the walls, biological constructs designed to defend the vessel. Maria destroyed them with her ship's guns, clearing a path deeper into the structure. She found what she was looking for, a massive chamber at the heart of the bioship where energy readings spiked off her sensors, some kind of power core or vital organ. She armed her last nuclear missile and fired it directly into the chamber, then pushed her engines to maximum, racing back the way she had come. The explosion was massive. The bioship convulsed, its entire structure collapsing inward. Maria's fighter burst out of the dying vessel seconds before it imploded. She had to fight to keep control as the shockwave caught her, spinning her fighter end over end. "Status," Patricia demanded. "I'm alive," Maria gasped. "That thing isn't." 2 down. The third bioship realized it was alone. It began to retreat, pulling back from the human fleet. But Patricia had no intention of letting it escape. She ordered pursuit and the human ships gave chase. They caught it near the edge of the system, where it tried to open some kind of dimensional portal. The human fleet didn't give it the chance. They concentrated all their fire on a single point, overwhelming its defenses through sheer volume. The bioship died slowly, piece by piece, until nothing remained but frozen chunks of alien flesh. Silence settled over the battlefield. Patricia looked at her damage reports. 5 ships lost, 127 crew dead, but 15,000 refugees saved. The refugee convoy was already moving toward the defense platform, their ships battered but intact. Captain Holmes' voice came over the communication channel, no longer resigned to death but filled with something else. Wonder maybe, or fear. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Holmes. We thank you." "But what are you?" Patricia smiled tiredly. "We're human, and we're here to help." Holmes struggled with the gravity as soon as he stepped through the airlock of the Indomitable. His body, evolved on a world where gravity was barely half of Earth's, felt like it was being crushed. Each step required conscious effort. His diplomatic escort, 3 other Verity officials, looked equally uncomfortable. One of them simply collapsed, unable to support his own weight. Human medical personnel rushed forward with equipment, adjusting artificial gravity fields around the fallen Verity. Within moments, he was breathing easier, though still clearly shaken. "Apologies," said a human woman in a crisp uniform. "We forget that our standard environment is hostile to most species. I'm Commander David Walsh. Welcome aboard." Holmes studied the human carefully. David was tall by Verity standards, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to assess everything with tactical precision. Like all humans Holmes had observed so far, he moved with an economy of motion that suggested constant awareness of his surroundings. "Predator awareness, this is normal for you?" Holmes asked, gesturing at the oppressive gravity. "This is actually reduced," David replied. "Standard Earth gravity is 0.98 meters per second squared. We've lowered it to 0.85 for ship operations. Makes it easier to move quickly during combat." Holmes felt something cold settle in his chest. These beings lived in conditions that would kill most council species within hours, and they considered it normal. He had reviewed humanity's file during the journey to this ship. Earth, Class 12 Deathworld, the highest rating in the Council's classification system. A planet where life should not have been possible, let alone intelligent life. David led them through corridors that were narrow by council standards, with low ceilings and harsh lighting. Everything was reinforced, built to withstand damage. The walls were lined with emergency equipment, medical supplies, firefighting gear, radiation suits. It was a ship designed for war, designed to take punishment and keep functioning. They passed human crew members going about their duties. Holm noticed how they moved in the heavy gravity without effort, how they carried weapons casually, how they nodded to their superiors with respect, but not fear. These were professional warriors, born and bred on a world that demanded strength. Admiral Patricia Okonkwo met them in a briefing room that doubled as a tactical operations center. She was older than David, with gray in her hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of long experience. She wore her uniform with the same casual competence as her crew. "Captain Holm," she said, offering her hand in the human greeting gesture. Holm took it carefully, surprised by the strength in her grip. "Thank you for coming. I know our environment is difficult for you. You saved 15,000 lives," Holm replied. "Discomfort is a small price for gratitude." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I must ask, why? You are not part of the Galactic Council. We have no treaties, no agreements. Why would you risk your lives for strangers?" Patricia smiled, but there was something sad in it. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because we know what it's like to face extinction alone." She activated a holographic display showing the current tactical situation. The Ravager swarm had consumed 40 star systems in the outer sectors. Council fleets were retreating toward the core systems, abandoning entire regions to the enemy. Between the Ravagers and the Council homeworld stood 40 inhabited planets with a combined population of 60 billion. "Your forces are falling back," Patricia observed. "Standard military doctrine would be to establish a defensive line and make them pay for every system they take. Instead, you're running." "We've tried fighting," said one of Holm's escorts, an official named Riven. "The Ravagers overwhelm any force we send against them. They adapt to our weapons, learn our tactics. Every battle costs us more ships and personnel. Eventually, we'll have nothing left to defend the core systems." David leaned forward. "You're thinking about this wrong. You're trying to preserve your forces for a final battle, but the Ravagers don't care about final battles. They care about consumption. Every system you give them makes them stronger. So what do you suggest?" Holm asked. "We throw our remaining fleets into suicide attacks?" "No," Patricia said. "You make them fight for every inch of space. You hit them when they're vulnerable. You destroy their supply lines, disrupt their coordination, force them to split their attention. You make them pay such a high price that they decide you're not worth consuming." Holmes stared at her. "That's Deathworld thinking." "Maybe," Patricia admitted. "But it's how we survived. Earth didn't give us easy options. We learned to fight smart because fighting hard wasn't enough." Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia worked with Council military advisors to establish a defensive line at the Meridian Cluster. It was a strategic bottleneck, a region where the Ravagers would be forced to move through narrow corridors of stable space. Human engineers modified Council defense stations, installing redundant systems and heavier armor. They trained Council crews in damage control, teaching them how to keep fighting even when their ships were falling apart. Commander David Walsh worked directly with Council soldiers, and the culture shock was immediate. During a training exercise, David presented a scenario where a ship was critically damaged with no chance of escape. The Council soldiers all voted to surrender or evacuate. "What if evacuation isn't possible?" David asked. "What if the enemy is going to kill everyone on board no matter what you do?" The Council soldiers looked confused. One of them, a young Torvin named Sella, spoke up. "Then we would die. There's nothing else to do." "Wrong," David said quietly. "You fight. You damage the enemy as much as possible before you die. You make them remember you. Every hit you score might save lives somewhere else." Sella's expression showed something between horror and incomprehension. "That's barbaric. That's survival," David replied. "On Earth we had predators that could kill us with a single bite. But humans survived by fighting back. Even when we knew we couldn't win, we fought. Because sometimes the point isn't to survive. The point is to make sure your species survives." Dr. Priya Sharma spent her time analyzing Ravager biology. From the remains recovered after the battle, she discovered something crucial. The bioships were vulnerable to rapid temperature changes. Their organic systems couldn't adapt fast enough to extreme thermal shock. She worked with Chief Engineer Robert Kim to develop specialized weapons, Thermal missiles that flash froze their targets, then superheated them in rapid cycles. It's cruel, Priya admitted to Patricia during one of their meetings, causing them that kind of pain. They're consuming billions of sapient beings, Patricia replied. I'll save my sympathy for their victims. When the Ravagers arrived at the Meridian cluster, they came with 200 bioships. Council sensors detected them 3 days out, and panic spread through the defensive line. Several council captains wanted to retreat immediately. Holm, who had been given joint command of the defense force, had to threaten them with charges of desertion to keep them in position. Patricia remained calm. She positioned the human fleet at strategic points with council ships supporting them. When the Ravagers entered the cluster, they found a prepared defense. The humans had turned every asteroid, every piece of space debris into a weapon. They had mined the approach corridors, established crossfire zones, created kill boxes where the bioships would be vulnerable. The battle lasted 36 hours. The Ravagers pushed forward with their usual overwhelming force, but this time they met resistance that didn't break. Human ships took horrific damage but kept fighting. The destroyer Valiant lost its entire starboard side, but continued firing with its remaining weapons until the crew finally evacuated. The cruiser Defiant rammed a bioship after losing all its weapons, punching through its hull and detonating its reactor inside the enemy vessel. Council ships, inspired by human example, held their positions even when it seemed hopeless. Holm's flagship took multiple hits but remained in formation, its crew fighting fires and repairing systems even as the ship shook apart around them. The Ravagers adapted to human tactics, but humans adapted faster. When the bioship started targeting human vessels specifically, Patricia changed formation, mixing human and council ships so the enemy couldn't focus fire. When the Ravagers tried to flank the defensive line, human fighters were waiting in ambush. By the end of the battle, the humans had lost 8 ships. The Council had lost 23, but the Ravagers had lost 75 bioships and the survivors retreated. For the first time since the invasion began, the Ravagers had suffered a strategic defeat. Holm contacted Patricia after the battle, his voice exhausted but filled with something new. We held. Against 200 of them, we actually held. That's what happens when you decide to fight, Patricia replied. Welcome to Deathworld Tactics, Captain. News of the Meridian victory spread across Council space like wildfire. Footage of human ships fighting against impossible odds played on every broadcast network. The galaxy watched as beings from a Class 12 Deathworld stood their ground against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. Within days, humans had a new name among the stars. Deathworlders. Maria Santos became an unexpected celebrity. Her fighter cam footage, recorded during her solo penetration of the Ravager bioship, was viewed billions of times. Council species watched in horror and fascination as she navigated through the living corridors of the alien vessel, destroying combat drones with precise fire, then delivered the killing blow to its core reactor. Interviews followed, broadcast requests for personal appearances. Maria hated all of it. She was a pilot, not a politician, but Patricia ordered her to accept some of the requests, understanding that humanity needed a face that the galaxy could relate to. During one interview with a Torvan journalist, Maria was asked the question that everyone wanted answered. Why did you go inside that ship? You could have retreated. No one would have called you a coward. Maria thought about it for a moment, because there were people behind us who needed saving, and someone had to take that thing down. I had the skills and the opportunity, so I did it. That's not heroism. That's just doing your job. The journalist pressed further. But you risked your life for aliens you'd never met. For a species who didn't even know you existed until a month ago. So, Maria replied, genuinely confused. Does that matter? They were in danger. We could help. That's enough. The interview went viral. The simple human logic that helping others needed no justification beyond their need was revolutionary to species who had spent millennia building complex hierarchies based on evolutionary advantages and political calculations. But not everyone was celebrating. In the council chambers on the core world of Torva Prime, debates raged about what humanity's involvement meant for the future. Ambassador Lena, who had sent the original distress call, found herself defending the very people who had saved her civilization. They're dangerous, argued Council Member Vortis, a conservative Torvan with significant political influence. Yes, they helped us. But look at how they fight. They accept casualties that would be unthinkable to our fleets. They use weapons of mass destruction without hesitation. They ram ships into enemies as a legitimate tactic. What happens when they turn that aggression toward us? They came when we called, Lena replied firmly. They lost ships and lives for people who had never acknowledged them. That's not aggression. That's courage. It's Deathworld barbarism, Vortis countered. Our classification system exists for a reason. Species from worlds like Earth are fundamentally different. They're wired for violence in ways we can't fully comprehend. The debate continued for hours, with no clear resolution. The council was split. Some saw humanity as saviors. Others saw them as a future threat that would eclipse even the Ravagers. Meanwhile, Patricia was planning something that would make those debates irrelevant. Dr. Priya Sharma had made a breakthrough in her research. The Ravagers weren't just traveling through normal space. They were using a dimensional rift to bring reinforcements from another universe. She had located that rift in a region called the Shade Nebula, an area of space so unstable that even council ships avoided it. We can close the rift, Priya explained during a command briefing, but we'd need to destroy the structure generating it. Based on our scans, that structure is massive, probably the Ravager equivalent of a home base or nest. David studied the tactical projection with a critical eye. It's behind their entire invasion force. We'd have to fight through their fleet just to reach it, and even if we succeeded, there's no guarantee we'd make it back. The council won't authorize this, added Robert Kim. They're already uncomfortable with our methods. A deep strike into enemy territory would terrify them. Patricia sat quietly thinking. She had known this moment would come. The safe play would be to continue defending the Meridian line, gradually push the Ravagers back, fight a war of attrition that could last years. But that wasn't the human way. Humans had reached the stars by taking risks that seemed impossible. We're not asking for authorization, she said finally. This is a human operation. Volunteers only. Anyone who wants to stay behind and continue defensive operations can do so without prejudice. Not a single officer volunteered to stay behind. The next day, Patricia sent a private message to Captain Holm. She explained the plan in full, expecting him to either report it to the council or try to stop her. Instead, his response surprised her. I'm coming with you, the message read, and I'm bringing 200 Viridi volunteers. You've shown us that survival requires courage. Now let us show you that we learned the lesson. 15 human ships departed for the Shade Nebula, along with 2 Viridi cruisers that joined against direct council orders. Holm had resigned his commission and convinced his most loyal crews to follow him. When asked why, he simply said, because the Deathworlders showed us what honor actually means. The journey took 5 days through increasingly unstable space. The dimensional barriers were thin here, and reality itself seemed to fray at the edges. Crew members reported strange dreams, visions of other universes bleeding through. Dr. Sharma spent most of the journey sedated, her mind too sensitive to the dimensional interference. They emerged in a region of space that shouldn't have existed. The Ravager nest hung in the void like a massive tumor. Organic structures kilometers across pulsing with unnatural light. Bioships were being grown here, emerging from birthing chambers fully formed and ready for war. The dimensional rift yawned behind it, a tear in space through which Patricia could see glimpses of an alien universe. Sensor contacts, reported the tactical officer. 200 bioships. 300. 400. They're everywhere. They knew we were coming, David said quietly. Of course they did, Patricia replied. She opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Admiral Okonkwo. We're not getting out of this the conventional way, so we're going to do something unconventional. We're going to punch straight through to that rift generator and blow it to pieces. Don't stop for anything. Don't engage unless you have to. Just fly like hell and shoot anything that gets in your way. The fleet accelerated to attack speed, formations tight, weapons hot. The Ravagers moved to intercept, a living wall of bioships that filled space in every direction. But the human fleet didn't slow down. They fired as they flew, nuclear weapons and railgun slugs and thermal missiles creating a corridor of destruction. Ships died quickly in that hell. The cruiser Halifax took 3 hits and detonated, taking 2 bioships with it. The Viridi flagship was torn apart by energy weapons, but its crew bought precious seconds for the other ships to advance. Sam Rodriguez and his fighter squadron flew point, clearing paths through the enemy formation with suicidal bravery. Commander David Walsh led Marine boarding teams onto bioships when the fleet needed to fight through choke points. They would teleport aboard, plant charges, and evacuate before the detonation, except sometimes there wasn't time to evacuate, and David would order the charges blown anyway, sacrificing the Marines to clear the path for the fleet. Maria Santos piloted her fighter with inhuman precision. Her reflexes pushed to their absolute limit. She destroyed combat drones, targeted weak points, and saved multiple larger ships from critical hits. But she took damage too, her fighter systems failing one by one. Dr. Priya Sharma recovered enough to work with Robert Kim on a final weapon. If they could reach the rift generator, they would need something powerful enough to destroy it completely. Robert had a solution, but it required the Indomitable's main reactor to be overloaded. Manually, with someone staying behind to make sure it detonated at exactly the right moment. Patricia understood immediately what he was suggesting. She relieved the bridge crew, ordering them to evacuate pods. David refused to leave, as did a dozen others. They would stay with their admiral to the end. The Indomitable broke through the final line of bioships, her hull burning, her systems failing, but her engines still firing. Patricia piloted the ship personally, guiding it toward the rift generator with hands that had commanded fleets across human space for 30 years. "All ships, evacuate now," she ordered. "That's a direct command. Get out of here while you still can." "Admiral," David began, but she cut him off. "Tell Earth we chose to stand," Patricia said. "Tell them the Deathworlders made a difference. Tell them we were brave." The Indomitable crashed into the rift generator at 40% light speed. The reactor went critical exactly as planned. The explosion was visible across 3 star systems, a flash of light so bright it burned itself into the sensors of every ship in the region. The dimensional rift collapsed, the Ravager nest disintegrated, and the invasion fleet found itself cut off from reinforcements. 9 human ships limped out of the Shade Nebula. 6 had been lost, including the Indomitable. 8,000 personnel dead, including Admiral Patricia Okonkwo and everyone who stayed with her on that final run. But the Ravager invasion was over. Without the rift, they couldn't replace their losses. The remaining bioships were hunted down over the following months by combined human and council forces. The galaxy was saved, but the cost had been terrible. Earth received the news on a quiet morning when the sun rose over the Atlantic. The transmission from Commander David Walsh, now promoted to Admiral by necessity, played on every screen across human space. His voice was steady, but his eyes told a different story. Eyes that had watched his commander and friend fly into death deliberately, knowing there was no other choice. Admiral Patricia Okonkwo and 5,947 personnel gave their lives to end the Ravager invasion. David said, "They knew the mission was one way. They went anyway. The dimensional rift is destroyed. The galaxy is safe. The cost was high, but we paid it because that's what humans do. We stand in the gap." Memorials were held across every human colony. Patricia's name was added to the Wall of Heroes on Earth, alongside every human who had ever sacrificed themselves for others. Her family, 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren, received the Star of Valor, humanity's highest military honor. But medals couldn't bring her back. In Council space, the reaction was more complex. The 9 surviving human ships returned to heroes' welcomes, but also to fear. Council species looked at these Deathworlders who had done the impossible, and some saw saviors. Others saw the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The debates in the Council chambers intensified. Ambassador Lena stood before thousands of representatives from across known space, making her case for humanity. "They lost 8,000 people to save us," she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "They came when we called for help, fought when we were ready to surrender, and won when we thought victory was impossible. We owe them everything." Council member Vortis stood to respond. He was older now, worn down by the war but no less convinced of his position. "And that's precisely why they're dangerous. Look at what they accomplished. In 2 months, these Deathworlders changed the course of a war we were losing for 2 years. They think differently than we do. They accept losses we would never tolerate. They use tactics we would consider war crimes. What happens when they decide they want something from us? They could have demanded anything already," Lena countered. "They could have held the galaxy hostage, used their victory to extract concessions. Instead, they asked for nothing. Not territory, not resources, not even formal recognition. They saved us because it was the right thing to do, or because they're establishing themselves as the dominant military power, Vortis replied, preparing for future expansion. The debate continued for 3 days. Representatives argued, negotiated, and politicked. Finally, the vote was called. Should humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, including a seat on the Security Directorate? The results came in slowly from across the galaxy. Some species voted immediately, their positions clear. Others debated until the last moment. When the final tally was displayed, Lena felt tears running down her face. 31,247 species voted in favor. 8,753 voted against. Humanity was in. David received the news aboard the battered destroyer Vigilant, one of the 9 survivors. He stood on the bridge looking at the message on his console and felt nothing but exhaustion. They had won. The galaxy was saved. Patricia was dead. 8,000 humans were dead. 200 Viridi were dead, and now they were being invited to join the club. "How do you feel, sir?" asked Lieutenant Maria Santos. She had survived with severe injuries. Her fighter destroyed, but her ejection pod recovered. She walked with a limp now and would probably never fly combat missions again. "Tired," David admitted, "and angry. We shouldn't have needed to prove ourselves like this. We should have been acknowledged decades ago before any of this happened. But we weren't," Maria said quietly. "So we proved it when it mattered most. That's worth something. Maybe it was." David wasn't sure anymore. He accepted the promotion, accepted the responsibility of commanding what remained of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, and prepared to return to Earth. But first, there was one more duty. Captain Holm had survived the Shade Nebula run, one of only 15 Viridi who made it back. His ship was destroyed, his career with the Council military was over, but he had no regrets. When David met with him before departing, the alien looked different, stronger somehow, despite the physical toll. "Your people changed us," Holm said. "We thought civilization meant avoiding violence, avoiding risk, avoiding sacrifice. You showed us that sometimes civilization requires all of those things." "We didn't mean to change anything," David replied. "We just did what felt right." "That's what made it so powerful," Holmes said. "You didn't think about it. You didn't calculate the cost versus benefit. You saw people in danger and you helped. That's what heroes do." David shook his head. "We're not heroes. We're just people who were in the right place at the right time." "Then I hope the galaxy has more people like you," Holmes said. The journey back to Earth took 2 weeks. David spent most of it writing reports, reading casualty lists, and trying to process everything that had happened. Dr. Priya Sharma recovered slowly from the dimensional interference, but she would never be quite the same. She had seen things in those bleeding universes that she couldn't explain, knowledge that human science wasn't ready to understand. Chief Engineer Robert Kim busied himself with repairs, keeping his hands occupied so his mind didn't dwell on the deaths he had helped cause. Every overload he had designed, every weapon he had built had killed Ravagers by the thousands. Sometimes he wondered if that made him a hero or a monster. Most days he decided it made him both. Sam Rodriguez received multiple medals for his actions in the Shade Nebula. His fighter squadron had lost 28 of 36 pilots, but they had cleared the path for the fleet's attack. He attended 28 memorial services and spoke at half of them, trying to find words to comfort families who had lost everything. There were no words. There never were. When the fleet finally reached Earth orbit, they found a changed solar system. News of humanity's acceptance into the Galactic Council had preceded them. Alien ships were already arriving, species wanting to establish diplomatic relations, trade agreements, cultural exchanges. The isolation was over. David stood on the observation deck of the Vigilant, watching Earth turn below him. It looked the same as always. Blue and green and beautiful. A Class 12 Deathworld that had produced a species capable of saving the galaxy. "Do you think she'd be proud?" Maria asked, joining him at the viewport. She didn't need to specify who she meant. "Patricia?" David considered it. "Yeah, I think she'd be satisfied. Not happy, satisfaction cost too much, but satisfied that we made a difference." "We're celebrities across half the galaxy now," Maria said. "The Deathworlders who saved civilization. Think we can live up to that?" "I don't know," David admitted. "But I guess we're going to find out." 5 years passed. Humanity integrated into Galactic Council society, though they maintained their military independence. Human officers trained Council forces in Deathworld tactics, teaching them that survival sometimes required sacrifice. Council species visited Earth, experiencing the hell world that had produced these impossible warriors, and returned with new respect for what it took to evolve there. Joint Human Council task forces patrolled border regions, hunting down the last scattered Ravager remnants. Dr. Priya Sharma established xenobiological research partnerships, sharing human knowledge in exchange for alien technology. Trade flourished. Cultural exchange programs brought alien students to human universities and human students to alien worlds. But not everyone was comfortable with the new order. There were species who remembered humanity's violent introduction to galactic affairs and feared what they might do next. There were humans who resented fighting for a galaxy that had ignored them for so long. Tensions simmered beneath the surface of cooperation. And in the depths of space, near the sealed dimensional rift in the Shade Nebula, sensors began detecting anomalous readings. Something was trying to reopen the portal, something that made the Ravagers look like a minor threat. The galaxy had been saved by Deathworlders once. It was about to need them again. The anomaly detector at Research Station Gamma started screaming at 3 a.m, station time. Dr. Priya Sharma was reviewing data from a completely different project when the alarms went off. She pulled up the readings and felt her blood go cold. The dimensional rift in the Shade Nebula, the one they had sealed 5 years ago with Patricia Okonkwo's sacrifice, was showing activity. Something was pushing against the seal from the other side. She sent an emergency transmission to Earth immediately, then started analyzing the data in detail. What she found was worse than she had feared. The energy signatures were different from the Ravagers, more complex, more organized, and there were 3 distinct patterns. 3 different forces trying to breach into their universe. Admiral David Walsh received the alert while having breakfast with his family. 5 years of relative peace had given him time to marry, to start thinking about a life beyond military service. That peace ended with Priya's message. He was on a shuttle to Fleet Headquarters within the hour. The emergency council meeting included representatives from 15 species. David noticed that none of them looked surprised by the news. They had all known this was possible. The question had never been if, but when. "How long until the seal breaks?" asked Ambassador Lena. She was older now, retirement age by Torvin standards, but she had stayed in her position specifically to work with humanity. 6 months, Priya said via holographic transmission. Maybe less. The seal was designed to hold against passive pressure, not an active assault, and these forces are definitely assaulting it. Council member Vortis, one of the few who had consistently opposed human integration, spoke up. "We should evacuate the Shade Nebula region immediately. Fall back to defendable positions. We cannot risk another catastrophic battle." "With respect," David said carefully, "that's exactly the wrong approach. If we let them break through, they'll establish a beachhead. Then we'll be fighting on our territory instead of theirs. We need to reinforce the seal or destroy whatever is trying to break it." "Another suicide mission?" Vortis demanded. "How many more of your people are you willing to sacrifice for galactic security?" "As many as it takes," David replied coldly. "That's what Deathworlders do. We stand in the gap." The room fell silent. Even after 5 years, that simple statement still had power. Humans had proven they would die for strangers. No other species could claim that with the same certainty. "I propose a joint operation," said Captain Holm. He had been promoted to admiral in the years since the Ravager War, commanding the Verity Defense Fleet. Human ships leading the assault, Council forces in support. We've trained together for 5 years. It's time to put that training to use. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in Council history, all member species agreed on military action. The Deathworlder Legion, as the combined force was unofficially called, would deploy to the Shade Nebula with one mission: stop the invasion before it started. David assembled the fleet over the next 3 months. 60 human warships, the largest force Earth had ever deployed. 120 council vessels from 40 different species, all trained in human tactics. 15,000 fighters. 300,000 personnel total. It was massive by any standard. But David remembered the Shade Nebula. He remembered how many ships they had lost last time. He wasn't confident it would be enough. Maria Santos had been promoted to captain and given command of the carrier Dauntless. Her injuries from the previous war had healed mostly, though she still walked with a slight limp. More importantly, she had spent 5 years training the next generation of fighter pilots. Her squadron leaders were the best humanity had to offer. Chief Engineer Robert Kim had developed new weapons based on 5 years of studying Ravager technology. Dimensional disruptors that could tear holes in space itself. Quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Gravity weapons that could crush ships like tin cans. If the invasion force made it through the rift, they would face weapons they had never imagined. The fleet departed Earth on a Tuesday, with ceremonies held across human space. This time, everyone knew what they were getting into. There were no illusions about the danger, but there was also no hesitation. The galaxy had learned what humanity meant by duty. They reached the Shade Nebula in 2 weeks, and David immediately understood that the situation was worse than they had thought. The dimensional rift was already partially open, and things were coming through. Not bioships like the Ravagers, but actual vessels. 3 different fleet types, each representing a different extragalactic civilization. The first fleet used crystalline technology, ships that looked like they had been grown from diamond, refracting light in impossible patterns. The second fleet was mechanical, perfect geometric shapes that moved with mathematical precision. The third fleet was hardest to classify, ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Well," Maria said over the command channel, "we wanted a challenge." David almost smiled. Almost. "All ships, battle formations. Let's show these invaders why you don't mess with Deathworlders and everyone they've trained." The combined fleet moved into position with practiced efficiency. 5 years of joint training had erased most of the cultural differences. Council captains gave orders that would have been unthinkable before humanity arrived. Accept casualties, attack aggressively, risk everything for tactical advantage. They had learned Deathworld lessons well. The crystalline fleet attacked first, their weapons firing beams of coherent light that could cut through armor like tissue, but human ships had been designed to take damage. They absorbed the hits, their redundant systems keeping them functional even when half the ship was destroyed. And they returned fire with kinetic weapons that shattered crystal structures efficiently. The mechanical fleet used numerical superiority, thousands of small drones coordinating in perfect synchronization. Sam Rodriguez led the fighter wings against them, and for the first time in years, he felt alive. The drones were precise, but they were predictable. Human pilots were chaotic, creative, random. The mechanical fleet couldn't adapt fast enough. The phasing fleet was the real threat. Their ships could move through solid matter, appearing inside Council vessels and tearing them apart from within. Standard weapons passed right through them. But Robert Kim had anticipated this. His dimensional disruptors forced the phasing ships into a single reality, made them solid, made them vulnerable. When they couldn't phase, they died just like anything else. The battle raged for 3 days. Ships on both sides died by the dozens. David watched from the bridge of his flagship Resolution as casualty reports climbed into the thousands. But the invasion forces were taking worse losses. They had expected an easy breach, a quick establishment of a foothold. Instead, they found a galaxy that had learned to fight. On the 3rd day, David made the decision that would define the battle. The dimensional rift was still growing, still allowing more invaders through. They could fight forever, and it wouldn't matter as long as reinforcements kept coming. They needed to seal the rift permanently. "We need to collapse it from the inside," Priya explained when David asked for options. She had been working around the clock on the problem. "Send a ship through the rift, overload its reactor on the other side, and let the explosion seal the dimensional barrier." "So another suicide run," David said quietly. "Another Patricia." "I'm sorry," Priya said. "But yes, someone has to stay behind to make sure the detonation happens at the right moment and location." David looked at his bridge crew. Young faces, old faces, humans who had joined after the Ravager War specifically to serve alongside the admiral who had survived the Shade Nebula. They were watching him, waiting for orders. "I'm going," Maria said over the command channel. "My ship is already damaged. My engines can make it through the rift, and I've got nothing left to prove. Let me do this." "Denied," David said immediately. "You've got pilots who depend on you, students who need to learn from you. You're not expendable." "Neither are you," Maria shot back. "The fleet needs its admiral. I'm just a ship captain. Let me make Patricia proud." David wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Leaders gave orders. Heroes followed them. And Maria Santos had been a hero since the moment she flew into that first bioship 5 years ago. "Permission granted," he said, his voice rough. "Godspeed, Captain." The Dauntless broke from the formation, its engines burning at maximum as it accelerated toward the dimensional rift. The 3 invasion fleets tried to stop it, recognizing the threat, but the combined Human Council fleet created a corridor. Ships sacrificed themselves to clear the path, buying Maria precious seconds. She flew through the rift, and reality twisted around her. The Dauntless emerged in a space between dimensions, a void where 3 universes met. She could see the invasion fleets massing on the other side, millions of ships preparing to pour through once the rift stabilized. "Not today," Maria whispered. She armed the reactor overload, set it for maximum yield, and opened a final transmission. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the United Earth Forces. To anyone who can hear this, we're humans. We're Deathworlders, and we don't run from fights. Remember that." The reactor detonated with enough force to crack dimensions. The rift collapsed inward, the dimensional barrier sealing permanently. The invasion fleets on the other side found themselves trapped, unable to reach through. The vessels already in the Shade Nebula were cut off from reinforcements. It took another 4 hours to destroy the remaining invasion forces. By the end, the combined fleet had lost 40 ships and 25,000 personnel. But they had won. The galaxy was safe again. David stood on the bridge of the Resolution, looking at the empty space where the rift had been. 2 of humanity's best officers, 2 of his closest friends, had died in this place. Patricia 5 years ago, Maria today. Both had chosen sacrifice over survival. Both had saved the galaxy. "Admiral," said his communications officer, "we're receiving transmissions from across Council space. Every species is broadcasting thanks. They're calling this battle the second victory. They're calling us the defenders of civilization." "We're not defenders," David said quietly. "We're just people who stood up when it mattered." 10 years later, David stood in a memorial garden on Earth looking at 2 names carved in stone. Admiral Patricia Okonkwo, Captain Maria Santos, heroes of humanity, saviors of the galaxy, Deathworlders who had shown the stars what courage meant. Around him, the garden was full of species from across the galaxy, Torvin, Veridi, and 40 others, all living in peace because 2 humans had chosen sacrifice over survival. The galaxy had changed. Council species explored their own capacity for courage, pushed themselves beyond comfortable limits, embraced the Deathworld philosophy that survival meant fighting for others. Admiral Holm, now retired, joined David at the memorial. They stood together in silence, 2 old warriors remembering friends lost. "Do you think they knew?" Holm asked finally. "Patricia and Maria. Do you think they knew what they would inspire?" David thought about it. Patricia flying into the rift generator, knowing she wouldn't return. Maria sealing the dimensional barrier, cutting herself off from home forever. Both of them had made their choices in moments when hesitation would have meant doom. "I think they just did what needed doing," David said. "That's the Deathworld way. You see a threat, you face it. You see people in danger, you help them. You see sacrifice required, you make it. No calculations. No political considerations. Just action." "The galaxy's better for having learned that lesson," Holmes said. David nodded, looking at the 2 names carved in stone. The galaxy was better. It was safer, stronger, more unified. Council species had learned that true civilization required courage, that peace required warriors willing to fight for it, that sometimes the greatest mercy was ruthless action against threats. But the cost had been terrible. 8,000 humans in the first war, 25,000 in the second, 2 of the bravest people David had ever known, sacrificed to save strangers. He wondered if Patricia and Maria would think it was worth it. Then he looked around at the memorial garden, at species from 40 worlds standing together in peace, and he knew the answer. they would have thought it was worth every sacrifice. Because that's what Deathworlders did. They stood in the gap, no matter the cost.